Hi, everybody. I see some people jumping into the waiting room here, and now we'll give it a second or two before we get started here. All right, why don't we go ahead and get started? Hi, everyone. My name is Aaron Williams. I'm a senior advisor here at the National Council for Mental Well-Being. I'd like to welcome you all to our office hours for our webinar panel discussion that we had last Tuesday around Start with Hope, but Don't Stop There. Conversations on Black recovery. So today, if we go ahead and go to the next slide, I'll do a few housekeeping notes before we jump into this. First, I'd just like to say, this session, this office hours, is funded through a initiative that was made possible by SAMHSA. The views written or expressed in this particular webinar do not reflect the official policies of the Department of Health or the U.S. government. Next slide. So as I think many of you know and have been on webinars and other activities with us, as we think about addiction, the language that we use is important. The words we use matter. Caution needs to be taken, especially when the disorders concerned are heavily stigmatized, such as substance use disorder. So we want to just think about that as we move forward in dialogue. And certainly there are a number of tools out there that talk a little bit more about language, especially as it relates to substance use disorders. The link at the bottom about recovery answers in the dictionary is a really helpful tool, but I just wanted to note that we should be mindful and not to use stigmatizing language as we talk about substance use disorders. Next slide. This webinar, Office Hours, is done in conjunction with the Peer Recovery Center of Excellence, which is funded by SAMHSA. There's a wealth of technical assistance materials, products that are available through the Peer Recovery Center of Excellence. And we also have no-cost technical assistance that you can receive through the Peer Recovery Center of Excellence. So if you go to the website, which will drop into the chat, you can submit a TA request, and you have someone call you back, usually within about 24 or 48 hours, to discuss the request. And they'll help you create a individualized plan about how they can respond and deliver technical assistance to you or your organization. You'll carry that out and then provide you with the surveys to let us know how you think the TA went or what other resources you may need. So it's really a good way to get no cost technical assistance from experts in the field. So please feel free to take advantage of that. And Danielle, I believe, put the link in the chat. So feel free to take advantage of that if you need some technical assistance. Next slide. So just a few other housekeeping notes. We are recording this session. We'd ask that folks please mute yourselves, particularly when any of our panelists are speaking. If we unmute you and you're asking a question, please remember to identify yourself, your name, where you work, and maybe even state a locale to the extent you would like to mention that. And then during some of the conversation, we invite you to submit questions using the Q&A tab below. Makes it easier for us to kind of see those questions and pose them to the panelists. We really value your feedback. So at the end of this, we're going to put up a QR code, which will have a survey attached to it. So we love to get your feedback, pretty shortly after this is over, in terms of what you thought and what else you might need to move forward. Next slide. So as I kind of talked about a little bit here, this is sort of office hours that is in support of the panel discussion we had last Tuesday. It's a good opportunity for us to provide some more in-depth and detailed conversation with individuals who may need some technical assistance or want to just dive deeper into some of the topics that we talked about. So this is really that sort of follow-up in an open space for that kind of dialogue. Next slide. So again, I want to reintroduce my esteemed panelists from the last session. Again, my name is Aaron Williams. I'm the Senior Advisor here at the National Council. We also have on hand Nyla Christian, who is the Executive Director of the Center for African American Recovery Development. We have Annie Powell, who is the founder and CEO of One World Recovery Network. And we also have Phil Rutherford, who is the strategy lead for substance use here at the National Council for Mental Wellbeing. Welcome all of you again, to this panel. Next slide. So why don't we go ahead and take the slides down and we can just kind of have a bit of a dialogue here. So what I wanted to do just a little bit is talk some about our session last week, which was I think a really good and thought-provoking session. Where we talked very much about sort of Black recovery, what that means in the broader historical context, what we should be thinking about when we think about stigma, how we should be thinking about recovery, in the Black community, what that means, what resources are necessary, how do we move forward, what do we think the future looks like, how do we advocate for more resources, policy change. So really covered, I think, a lot of ground in terms of, thinking about the nuts and bolts and the essence of Black recovery and looking at this from a macro perspective, how, trauma plays a role in substance use and what its impact is within the Black community, how discrimination, both in terms of substance use and in terms of being from a marginalized community, has a significant impact in the work that we do and how people think about and recover. We also talked about the different language used to discuss and describe recovery within the community, how some people don't really talk about being in recovery. They may talk about it in religious terms of being saved or, being delivered in some way. So thinking about all of those nuances and all of those, different perspectives, I think there's also, a lot of hope for the future. And the idea that was brought up, the idea that addressing substance use and recovery for African Americans and doing that in a robust way is really beneficial for all Americans, for the country as a whole. So even seeing ourselves in that broader context with some of the discussion from last week. So what we wanted to do today is invite those who have hopped on to participate here and invite them to ask questions, or if they have something that may be going on within their own organizations or their own community, and really have an opportunity to get a different perspective or another perspective from some of our panelists, our esteemed and knowledgeable panelists here, about how they might want to move forward, or, where particular resources are, or even just sort of a different look at what they may be facing or trying to work through. So while people are thinking of those questions, again, feel free to put those in the Q&A box, and we'll go through as many of those as we get in the time that we have. We did have a few questions that came in already from our previous session, and they came in through sort of our registration. So what I may want to do is just, pose these questions now to our panelists, and then we can kind of move into any other new questions that may come up for folks who are on the call. So one of the questions that came in is a discussion, which we had some discussion about last week, but the idea of how do we have conversations about the impact of intergenerational trauma in the context of substance use recovery. We did have, I think, some conversation about, racism and trauma, but this person is asking about how do we think about having those conversations in the context of substance use. So I'll just go ahead and open it up to our panel here.
Well, I'll hop in. I think first the wording of that question was, how do we have discussions around or about substance use or how do we have discussions about intergenerational trauma in the context of substance use disorder recovery? I think it actually needs to be reversed, and the discussion really needs to be about intergenerational trauma and substance use disorder recovery as a sort of a distal or a secondary component of that, because substance use disorder, we don't have all of the evidence yet, but we know that there's a direct link between trauma, specifically early life trauma, and not just substance use disorder, but a whole host of other things that happen later in life. So I think until we really dig into and understand trauma, both intergenerational and actual trauma that happens to people younger in life, I think that's really where the effort needs to be. The discussion of substance use as a function of that is really where our efforts need to be, not so much yes, you have substance use disorder, and yes, you have trauma, because I think that those two things are not separate. I think it's all part of one condition.
I think that's a really good point, Phil. I often am asked which one came first. People want, was it the chicken or the egg? And I think when we're looking at the humanity of the people that we're supporting within our organizations, our families, our communities, then we look at the whole person. And we recognize that there were points of stress, trauma, issues, and substance use is just the fruit or evidence of the body, the brain, the soul, or the spirit, however you refer to that, as the way that we're trying to find peace. We're trying to recenter and recalibrate ourselves. So when we see people as human beings, then it's less about the things and more about the person and how do we support them today.
I actually like moving that forward in when you talk about, how do we move forward? In the midst of reading Dr. Nzinga Harrison's Unaddicted, and she very, lean forward, she talks about, we're talking about treatment and recovery, and she talks about prevention from a completely different sort of standpoint. The ability and the accessibility of the information that we have specifically within the Black community to begin talking about those social determinants, and actually what both my colleagues are talking about, in the sense that, if we begin talking about those potential traumas that lead to seeking the alleviation and the relief, then we're actually changing the conversation. So, I mean, if the question is specifically, how do we talk about intergenerational, I'd like to just push forward and say, how do we address, intergenerational trauma moving forward so that we're actually not having this conversation from the same standpoint 25 years from now? We lost an entire few generations waiting for the outcome of the war on people and how that's affected us intergenerationally. So I want to talk about what we do moving forward. And I don't think that the conversation moving forward doesn't include what has happened. I just, very solution oriented in solution mode for me.
Yep. And just one last thing on that. It's really important to me that we stop the harms, right? Like we talk about intergenerational trauma and all of the things that happen. There are plenty of things that can't be helped. But what got me on this was I was thinking about the talk, right? The talk that my dad had with me about what to do when I got pulled over by the cops. And the talk that my grandfather had with my father about what to do when you got pulled over by the cops. Well, one thing that could help with that was if maybe we stop killing Black men in traffic stops, right? Like, and I know that's an oversimplification. I get that there's all kinds of stuff that impacts that, but it just like some of the trauma that is experienced is avoidable. It is possible to stop doing the things that is causing trauma. There are things that we can't eliminate, but there's some things that we can. So in addition to the internal work, like there are things like domestic violence and all of that stuff that we can't exactly fix all of that immediately, but there is some stuff we can fix. So I don't want to leave that behind, because I feel like sometimes that gets left behind in the conversation. Like we got to work on this trauma, like we can't fix it. How about we stop doing some stuff that we can just stop doing? Sorry, not sorry.
No, I think those are some really great points about how we even look at the issue. In some ways I think about some of the analogy of everybody's so accustomed to driving around the boulder in the middle of the highway that maybe we ought to stop and actually move the boulder out of the highway so that we can move forward without having to do that. So so definitely I think some really good points to think about how we look at this issue of trauma, particularly in its relationship to substance use. Similarly, there was another question that came in around stigma. How do we address stigma against mental health and substance use in the Black and African community? They certainly, I think, these are highly stigmatized, illnesses and sort of, I guess, spectrum of illnesses. And, certainly within, some communities, there's less knowledge and even, lots of stigma too about, receiving services or, even sort of, partaking in that. So how do we think about, stigma around both mental health and substance use within the community?
I think the first thing that came to my mind is who's we. That's the first thing that came to my mind when I wonder, is that a we as in we with lived experience? Is that a we as in the big W we? That would be the first thing, because boy, is this contextual, right? One of the things that I can personally think of is I was galvanized to recover out loud. I was very, very focused on being able to be available for the sisters on the other side of the door by making and normalizing the conversation around mental health, wellness, substance use disorder, coming out of the dark into the light, and being sure to somewhat heal transparently, right? So that for me, when I think about we, the first thing I think about is what have I done personally, and what do I do in my community, and then making it very central and integral to me to not just be available, but then to also create that space for others to be available. And so, I'll start there. I know this is a really multi-layered piece. I mean, there's what listen. So there's a few things. Engaging some folks who are recognized and notable in our communities to begin normalizing the conversation, bring the conversation forward. Mental health is health, that kind of thing. Highlighting some of the success stories of those folks who have, traversed the gap, whatever that gap is. And the gap is, multidimensional. But being sure to highlight and amplify those stories. Educating our community, bringing some awareness to the light as to, what the core issues are in terms of substance use disorder, behavioral health, mental health. So I think that there's some inner community work, and I'll just kind of start there, because I think, obviously, I always say, I've not seen a person of color on intervention yet. So, I think that there's some onus obviously put upon those who have chronicled the story of addiction in the Black community to help address stigma, by highlighting some of the stories. But again, that's an external solution. I want to start internally in our community.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So yeah, thinking about how do we, begin to address this, stigma within the community around substance use and mental health.
Yeah, I so agree with Nyla. One of the things that in Black communities, and this is just normalized, that we do not, especially Black women, we do not have time to take care of ourselves. We got to keep pushing. My mom used to tell me, you do not have time to feel sad or have a pity party. You got to keep fighting. And that's just normalized, right? So we're expected to be super men, super women, raising super children. And I think some of the first parts of this is self-compassion, recognizing it's okay not to be okay. And no is a complete sentence. So when you're taking care of yourself, put your mask on first. And then also raising generations of children that recognize when they're not okay. They're able to identify, like Black boys are able to identify when they're not okay, and that their homes are safe spaces to take the armor off. We recognize as Black people, Field talks about it. I have a Black son and Black grandsons. So we armor them up. We make sure they're prepared when they walk out of that door. But at what point do they armor down? Where are the safe spaces that they can armor down? And talk about, I'm really feeling depressed. I'm feeling anxious. Being able to say the words. And then the other part is the institutions in our communities, which is the church. Black people, our faith, our spirituality is very important to us. So how do we, as Nyla said, be out loud and proud about our recovery, about our healing, about how we use language to describe that? Educating the community and the church. And I'm not talking about education in terms of trying to persuade, but to give context to the experiences that Black people are having and the multiple pathways to healing, and being able to galvanize and mobilize people in the language by which we talk about it. So just like we normalize it's not okay to pull over to the rest stop and take a break, we want to begin to talk about it and normalize that it's okay to take care of yourself.
both of my colleagues use the word normalize. I would like to say the word normalize. This is something that we have to do. We have to normalize the presence of mental health. And the thing is, there's also a language thing here, because I was thinking about this. It is not that, like, so the storyline is the Black community is resistant to mental health. That's not true. Mental health and mental health services have been delivered in the Black community since we got here, right? It is the methodology and the way that those services have been delivered that is perhaps what is different. But I promise you, we have not survived as a people through all of the things that we have gone through without competent mental health services being delivered in the community, because otherwise many of us would have run screaming into the night. Some of us have. So it's not that there hasn't been that, and a lot of that has come specifically through the church. It's why the church is such an archetype in our community. A lot of those services have been done by pastors and deacons and Sister Eunice and all of the people that have done what they can do to hold the community together. Now, is that an evidence-based practice? Well, I would argue that spirituality is probably an evidence-based practice, but is that exactly in line or in step with current research around medication? Probably not. And there's a value in using pharmacology to help with some of our conditions. But it's really important to me that we normalize mental health and help people see that, like, if you go to a men's group every other week and you share with your brothers in the men's group, and then you talk to your pastor, that is a type of, there's a pathway to getting help. The thing that we need to do is extend that out to other services and let people know that it's okay to use those other services as well. And it's not a violation of your faith, and you're not weak or soft for doing that. It is just another method for help. And like I said, I understand that a mental health professional might look at what I just said and completely disagree. And I'm okay with that. It wouldn't be the first time somebody disagreed with me. But I do know that there is something that has been going on in our community that has preserved us. So we don't need to eliminate that. We need to add to that.
I think, before we go to, I guess, our next sort of question, I guess I really, sort of like this and wanted to just extend this a little bit. And you see what you all's thoughts are about the idea, I think, that sometimes gets lost in this, is that if there is a particular resistance or stigma, some of that is born out of our experiences with the traditional system. Some of that is, connected to this idea that, hey, Auntie so-and-so went over to the clinic and it didn't work out well, or she was treated poorly, or some other thing was happening. So I don't know what you all's thoughts are about, how some of those engagements with the traditional system have affected sort of our, willingness to go back to the well, so to speak.
I'm bristling a bit, Phil. I can see you are as well. I'll jump in with a quick personal, my mother told me my mother told me at the onset of her behavioral health challenges, don't tell nobody. And it wasn't don't tell my neighbor, it was don't tell them. Right? It was very, very clear to me that this was not something to share with those in the system. And I wanna come back around to what Annie was saying about both Black women, Black families, and Black boys in particular, and this idea, that we are not allowed to be unwell, right? We are resilient and resistant and to the point of deterioration, right? And that is it's tragic, actually. I want to come back around to our children, though, because I think something very interesting. I think I sit in company here with my colleagues, and I have a 20-something-year-old young Black man who who I see navigate through the world that we're in, and especially the social climate that we're in, and how interesting it is how the talk is still the talk, Phil. And there's also this idea, as Annie was saying, to set them up with a different sort of perspective and outlook about what wellness looks like, what safe places are, and why those places are safe, and a very realistic and I think very practical foundation of how to find and seek help, remedy, alleviation, all of the things that they need in order to face, because the talk is ongoing. But yeah, the system that broke us, right? So why would I go back to that system that didn't help us and paraded us across the television screens like criminals and animals during a time where we could have used some compassionate care, like you're seeing now with the opioid epidemic? So, so much more to say in this, and I know that we could go for a while on this.
Oh, I'm gonna try not to go hard here, but and I stopped saying this because people misunderstood, but I used to say all the time that my kids are the first generation of Black folks to have mental illness, or mental health challenges, because it like I just don't remember it being a thing when I was growing up, for some of the reasons that Nyla described. If it weren't so bad, the APA would not have issued an apology. If you don't know what I'm talking about, search APA and African Americans an apology. They issued a formal apology for treatment of African Americans. There actually was, I can't, the term eludes me, but there was a psychiatric disorder coined in the 1800s. I can't remember the technical name of it, but it was this runaway slave syndrome. So the history of psychiatry and psychology in America has not been kind to people that look like me. Its start was with a diagnosis that said if I ran away from enslavement, that I had a mental defect. That transitioned into post-slavery. If I was not acting in a way that general society wanted, I could be placed in an asylum without any support or any kind of civil process whatsoever. Like, so and again, this is something that I've got some depth in. I don't want to steer the conversation toward this, but it is not a mistake that the Black community does not hold the psychiatric community in high regard. There is plenty of historical evidence that not only is it not helpful, but it has been directly harmful, which is why we get to an apology. And that apology statement came out 3 years ago, 4 years ago. So we're not talking about something that came. I was talking about stuff that happened with Black people in the 1800s and early 1900s. That apology came a couple of years ago. So we're talking about something that has been entrenched for years and years, which is probably not why your mom said don't tell them people, right? So anyway, I feel a soapbox creeping up under me, so I'm gonna kick it over to Annie. I don't want that to happen.
I appreciate you bringing that forward, Phil. The fact that the research shows that that the dominant culture believes that Black people can handle more pain than our counterparts. That speaks to the trauma, right? What we kind of started this conversation with. The trauma and the very bad experiences we've had with seeking the traditional help, that deters us away from asking for help from people that are not within our community, which isolates us from accessing certain supports or services, even when dominant culture comes into our communities and say, we want to help you, we want to serve, here's the resources, here's all of the things. And I say that's great, because I kind of saw a question in the Q&A. That's wonderful. But did you ask? Oftentimes, our communities are perched on, and we're not asked. What is it that you would like to see? Our voices are not centered in any of the work. So hence the distrust, the fear, and the resistance, to Nyla's point, the resistance to seek help. All of those things are at play, which ultimately affects our health and well-being overall.
Exactly. Thank you for that. I just wanted to, just add some, layers, into this conversation, our hesitance, there's a justification to our hesitance in some ways that needs to be, considered. But, given that point, we had a question that came in earlier about this, but Dan also asked it in the chat. So I feel like, we want to, hop into it. Is this question of allyship? I think it, goes pretty well with our conversation currently. What can, as Dan puts it, a progressive middle-aged white male, how can he be an advocate for his Black and brown friends in recovery, and particularly in the South?
I think we're all waiting to go. Who?
I know. That's like a loaded question.
So I'll start with just a couple of things. I think of so first of all, allyship is important. There's no social movement that has ever succeeded without target group and allies. So so first things first, thank you for your allyship. Second thing, I think it's really important to speak up and speak out. And there are some conversations, like we're having this conversation and we're in a mixed group and we're talking about what we're talking about, and we will advance the agenda a certain amount, right? Whatever that amount is. But there are rooms and places where we can't go and we can't be listened to, or we won't be listened to. I think for allies, and I like the sort of ally, I can't remember the middle word, but it's ally something and then co-conspirator. I like the co-conspirator model for someone that wants to help get in those rooms where there's no one that looks like me, and advocate there, because that is really where change can really happen. Like if you're in a room and you hear something that is inappropriate or something that is just a wee bit racist, I don't know what that would be, but if when you hear that, challenge it there, and advocate there, advocate in those places where you don't see people that look like me, because I think that there's an additive effect for work done in that space. So that's thing number two. Thing number three for me is, as like I was going to say this when we were talking about mental health, there is a funding problem, and it's true for all sorts of things. But like even when we look at something as simple as mental health services and getting services to particular communities, however it works, for some reason, when funding is distributed out to communities, it seems that the Black community is frequently last. If you're in a space and in a funding space, might be good to ask that question. Why is that? Why is it that these communities are last? And it sounds different coming from an ally than it does coming from the target group. And I probably will have more, but I'll pass to colleagues.
Let's see, Annie, you dropped something in the chat. You want to elaborate a little?
I do. I'm just, Phil took took the shine, but I so agree. We are all allies. And what I often share with our white allies is you're at tables, places, and spaces that I may never access. But you can take with you our stories, our challenges, and speak in those places in a way, as Phil described, where people will hear you. If I speak, I'm a clanging cymbal. If you speak, it's something that people want to hear, and recognize that. We don't have to use it as we should, all of the people should come in the room, but know that you're in the room and you carry our stories and our experiences with you. We talk about like Gen Zs and millennials, right? They're always talking about the platform. How are you using your platform? What conversations are you having with people? Are you in spaces and places where racist remarks, oppressive beliefs are still in play? Do you speak truth to power? Or do you allow that to continue to be the narrative? You have an opportunity to change the narrative because you're in spaces and places that we are not. So I'll hand it over to Nyla.
Yeah, I'm smiling. So I'll come from a personal standpoint. So I'm a New Yorker, and I happen to be working in a lot of new emerging Black-led RCOs that are in the SOUF in the South. And I can't tell you guys how incredibly like surprised I am, and surprised in a way. I'm in rooms where Black folks are being spoken for when they're in the room, which I find interesting. I find that there, it seems to be still existing sort of a tacit agreement between, Black folks and white folks that the South is its own entity, and I find it interesting because I've learned a lot when Dan, love the question. Love the question. I love what my colleagues have to say. Um, I won't reiterate what they've already said. I think, be prepared to get uncomfortable as an ally, as a co-conspirator. I don't even use ally anymore. It's co-conspirator, definitely, Phil. Um, and when I say be prepared to get to feel a bit uncomfortable, there may be opportunities, like Annie said, when you're in the room and we're not in the room, and there's things happening that should not be happening. Be prepared to step up. Be prepared to school your colleagues. Offer that, invite people. So I love the phrase, instead of calling people out, invite people in. I'm thinking of ally cohorts. Right. I remember during 2020, lots of friends, big diverse platform of friends that I have. And, and the whisper was, do your homework, right? Like, had enough questions. Ask me what I need, but if you need some information around why I need what I need, let's do some homework. Let's do some footwork, right? Let's do some studying. Let's honor um, our ally, right? The target group, with having done some homework, having done some footwork, having done some own personal process work, and that includes corporate process work. That means just what Annie was saying. How is your organization getting down in this journey that we have together? If we're allies and co-conspirators, if you're in the room and you're the only guys in the room, ask why. You know, advocate for our invitation. And I'm not going to say to the table, Annie, but advocate for our invitation to the recipe. How about that? Right? Not the table, right? That's after the thought. But there are ways in which your entitlement and privilege, and I know those are fiery words, but it is what it is, right? You know, but there are opportunities to utilize your ability and your capacity for being invited into rooms that we're not in, to move the ball forward and to widen the doorway. And know that what Phil said, I also agree with. Uh, the movement needs all of us moving in the same direction. We need to all be moving in the direction of equity, which is also this fiery word right now. But thank you for the question, because I think the question is super important. Everything that my colleagues said, and more. It's a deeper question than we can cover in the next 14 minutes, but thank you for the question.
Well, and that middle word, because I looked it up while we were talking, so that's important. It's ally, accomplice, co-conspirator. And the point, you can look it up on YouTube. There's a woman who gives a talk, but the idea is that you're moving towards co-conspirator, right? And if you find someone that is an ally, you want to move them toward co-conspirator, right? So you start as ally, you kind of move toward accomplice, and then hopefully you're moving toward co-conspirator as well.
Can I just round one more? Go ahead, Annie.
Andy, yeah.
I'm looking at your comment, and I just want to add this. There's this other piece that I find is so interesting. When we're the only ones in the room, and there's something happening, and we know from experience that this thing is happening. I don't know how many times I'm in the room, and both people in recovery and people of color in recovery, and specifically Black people in recovery, are being talked about. And I have to remind the room, I'm here, right? One. And two, there's a look over your shoulders like, did anybody else hear that? I love what you're saying, Annie, because I find that oftentimes allies who haven't moved along the spectrum yet to accomplice and co-conspirator might not think that it's important to stand with and to honor what's happening and say, I hear you, I see you, I believe you, because that's, building that case that something is happening when you're the only other in the room is it's not only lonely, it's very disempowering. And I think that I'll use a term that I've heard bandied about too, but those micro invalidations, right? If you see it happen, if you see something, say something, right? If you see something, say something, and let us know that we're heard and seen. Annie, I know I took that from you, but it really hit me because that's very personal, very personal.
It really is, because I think the question, if I'm not mistaken, said friends. And that's not a likely term to use, not associates or colleagues. That the word friends means that you're invested in some way in that relationship. And so recognizing that engagement with your friends requires you also to hold space, because our experiences can be a bit much. You don't live in my community. You don't shop at the grocery stores. You don't attend the worship centers that I attend. So your experience is really abstract. It's the stories that maybe I've shared with you, or things that you've seen on television. So what I would say first and foremost, when you are referring to a Black person as a friend, is I hear you. Like, I hear what you're saying to me. And to say that I see you mean I see you wholly, WHOLE. And then not only do I have to convince you, the Black person, because we're tired of educating white people, you actually believe me. And when you believe me, you carry me with you in all that you do, in allyship, co-conspirator. I am with you.
I think those are great responses. And Dan, thank you for the question, because I think it's something that needs to be brought to the table as we think about how we can move forward and how we can think through all of this in ways that create the kind of equity that we want. So we have about, I guess, roughly about 10 minutes or so left. I would invite, any of the others on the call, again, if there are, people who have questions or comments about something that they may be thinking about within their workplace, or they're trying to work through, and you want another perspective, another pair of eyes, or in this case, another 6 to 8 pair of eyes to kind of look at it and give you some ideas about it. Welcome you to drop, any of those questions into the chat or the Q&A. certainly, we'll be happy to kind of walk through those, um, as we can with the time allotted. So feel free to drop those in. But, while we're waiting on some people to put those into the chat, I did want to, revisit, this idea, I think, Phil, that you brought up around funding and around policy, right? And because I think that ties into this idea of allyship, right? And about how, um, we live in an environment where resources are, doled out in particular ways. So as many advocates and allies as needed can help. But just, thinking about, as you all are thinking about the field and this idea of, policy and resources, the kind of work that needs to be done, or how allyship can really help in those endeavors.
I want a world where we have convenience care. So, like if you get a cut that needs a couple stitches, you can go to an urgent care and they'll stitch you right up. And you just walk in the door and there's minimal screening. Basically, they're like, what's that? Your arm's cut, you're bleeding, you need stitches. All right, go to triage, off you go. Yeah, I want that for behavioral health. You walk in the door, you get some light triage, and you get care. And I'd like that funded by our federal government. I'll be more than happy to reduce our defense spending by a small amount to do that. That could be funded in its entirety by probably about 1%, 2% of our current defense spending for every community in America. So that's all.
Absolutely. And, I wonder about this idea of sort of coalition building, right? So, how, um, what might be some ideas to help, build some of these coalitions across communities? Like, how do we um, engage, or what might be, the best way to think about some of those cross collaborations with other communities?
Several thoughts, starting going actually kind of back to what Phil was saying. Before I get to the coalition building, Aaron, I was just thinking about, this idea. I think Annie started with this. We're doing the work. Oh no, I think Phil said it. We're doing the work. We've been doing the work. There's no possible way that our communities could have endured, survived, thrived through years of just abject, brutality had we not been doing the work already. So, there's this idea that the work that's already being done on the ground needs to be recognized for the support it's given our communities, and that we should be focusing on infrastructure building and amplifying those voices, that work, that already exists, and giving those groups, those initiatives, those platforms, those organizations that are doing the work, the support that they need. And I think that that's a really important thing. And I think that what's happening just in this room right here is happening, right? So I believe that the solution's in this room. And I think that it's important to see that. It's important for the recovery advocacy movement as a whole to recognize that marginalized communities, in whatever ways that may not be evidence-based and recognized, have been doing the work. So just, advocating for recognizing practice-based evidence is super important, I think. And talking about coalition building, it's interesting. I think that all lives do matter. Right. I absolutely think all lives matter. I also think that when we're talking about Black folks, we can talk about Black lives mattering, and that's good. And I'm really focused on building and strengthening the voice and the voices within our community in order to sit and have conversations for coalition building across the POC, spectrum and the spectrum of marginalized communities. And I absolutely think that's necessary. And I think that that's done sort of in a, I think I think it's done in tandem. And I think there are those of us in our Black recovery advocacy movement that are focused on some coalition building, as others in the movement focus on building the infrastructure within our community and working together. I think that we'll have a better, stronger voice at whatever point across the coalition building. I do believe that it's about collaborative, a collaborative movement. And I think that we need to spend some time at home. We need to spend some time building us. We need to spend some time in community.
Exactly. Thank you for that. So we have just about a minute or two left. We can begin to put up on the slide here, I think our survey, but I wanted to just get any closing thoughts you all have for the folks who are on. I think this was a great discussion, particularly talking about allyship and about stigma within the community around services and service delivery. Any closing comments for folks?
And then this is actually just kind of a riff off of what Niall was talking about as far as community and coalition building. It's really important to me that we work against the scarcity mindset. One of the biggest enemies of coalition building is competition, and the structures of funding that exist right now are in some ways designed to create scarcity. They're designed to create this notion that if you get it, I won't. If they get it, I won't. I don't believe that specifically around Black recovery that we are suffering from a lack of resources. I believe that we're suffering from a lack of political will to place the resources where they need to go. And so as I talk to organizations around the country, as I talk to different folks, I'm always trying to think of ways that we can share rather than fight. And I know that probably sounds Pollyanna, like I got rose tinted glasses on, but I don't, whatever we are currently doing in the way of competition and scarcity is producing less than favorable results. So I would like to try something different. That is all.
I agree, Phil. That's how we got here. Grassroots movement. We came together, we collaborated, we shared resources, and we continue to do that. We can transform our communities.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Only one word, which would be Ubuntu.
Okay.
And I'll end with that. That says it all.
All right. Well, thank you for that. If we go to the slide really quickly, just to put up our survey, we'd love to, again, get your thoughts. I think there's a QR code there that you should be able to scan with your phone, or Danielle may have also dropped it in the chat here. But I wanted to, again, thank our panelists for this today. It has been, great, and discussion was really good. Once again, for all of those who decided to hop on to the call today, thank you for that as well. Yep. And so the survey will pop up when you guys exit. But yeah, so thank you all for joining us today, and look forward to continued discussion and dialogue on these critically important issues. Thank you all.